Hi everyone, and thank you for tuning in today. My name is Robert Cuthbert, and I'm a PhD student at the Queensland University of Technology. And on behalf of my research team, listed on this slide, I'll be presenting our work on designing gainful virtual reality environments for burn rehabilitation. This study aims to understand how virtual reality technology can be designed for meaningful rehabilitation of burn injuries. To understand this area, we decided to implement an ideation process known as the Altizer's design box with key stakeholders in the burn rehabilitation timeline. To save on time for this presentation, I won't go into all the detail about all the results we gathered from our participants, but instead I would like to discuss some of the novel outcomes we found. When discussing current technology in the burns rehabilitation cycle, all participants were unanimous in saying that what was currently available was just not good enough. And they were hopeful that VR technology could aid with their opinions of the technology in this area, as they recognized the high levels of distraction it may offer for pain management. This fits with previous literature. However, participants further discussed the opportunities for VR being used as something known as a bridging technology. And what we mean by this is that VR applications could provide users with normality and home life in the hospital, and then further, VR could be able to be used to provide them with the tools and the training to help transition them back to the outside, such as creating safe social interactions while patients may be at their most vulnerable. The next novelty that participants discussed is the idea that the application itself should be dynamic and change with the needs of the patients in their rehabilitation phases. And what we mean by this is that when we look at the timeline for burn rehabilitation, VR should be provided to users at the beginning of the acute rehabilitation phase for pain management, then transition to intermediate to aid with their motivation in their hospital physical therapy, and then finally help with their long-term rehabilitation out of the hospital by providing them with skills when bridging them from hospital to the home. Health professionals discussed the idea that the environment should be something local and recognizable, as they had seen it in media and thought it was quite novel. Further, they discussed previous patients that had spoken about wanting to get back to work and back to their normal lives and environments when they finished their therapy. Survivors and carers, however, brought up this idea that the environment should be something aspirational. And what I mean by this is that it should be a goal that they can look forward to seeing when they're home and out of the hospital. As survivors put it, it's to bring back hope into the treatment. Both groups discussed the environments themselves being cool in temperature, which fits with the previous body of work exploring VR for burn rehabilitation, including Snow World VR and other rehabilitation environments. However, a novelty that this study adds to the body of literature is the idea of low forms of virtual heat sources. Health professionals discuss this in terms of sunlight, but introducing light forms of sun safety, such as sources of shade in the environment, sunscreen around the environment, and sun-safe clothes on the user's avatar. Survivors discussed low forms of heat in a different sense, in terms of realism and usability. By this, we mean that if the VR environment was in the kitchen that provided them with a cooking game, they would have access to a gas stove, or you would see candles around the environment. Agency was a theme that was discussed throughout all stages of the design process, being most prominent in the problem, aesthetic, and solution sections of the design box. Survivors and carers had discussed a lack of agency they experienced, which had negative psychological effects for them, as they felt like sheep when they were in the hospital, passed around from one health professional to the next, and then when they were leaving the hospital, that they were given a checklist of when to take their medications, and that was it. They were then flooded with too much agency when they left the hospital and returned home, which challenged both themselves and their carers in their own rehabilitation journeys. Health professionals discussed agency differently, discussing how giving too much agency to patients could result in them not pushing their rehabilitation to its limits, which this could result in permanent scarring and loss of movement. Previous research has highlighted this idea as the sick role, where patients become reluctant to their rehabilitation and suffer permanent health complications. So with all of this, and from all the discussions of the study, we present some design implications going forward with the future VR environments for burn rehabilitation. These implications include a dynamic hospital-to-home application, where the application grows with the patient through their entire rehabilitation cycle, from acute to long-term rehabilitation. Agency, which even though is a fine line, VR can provide users with some control through customization by allowing patients to customize the aesthetics of the environment they may be able to satisfy their need for agency. Further, by providing health professionals the control over the exercises and the difficulty, it avoids creating the sick role for the patients. Finally, the environment should provide both aspirational and recognizable options for the user that they can choose from, further aiding with patient agency. These environments should consist of cooler temperatures that expose small amounts of virtual heat, such as sunlight. Further, the environments should highlight the importance of heat safety, such as shade and sunscreen when in sunlight, to provide users with training when going home from the hospital, aiding with this idea of the bridge from hospital to home. Thank you for your time today. Feel free to read the rest of the paper and get in contact with me or the rest of the research team, as we would love to hear your thoughts and questions. Thank you so much.